Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Today we are going to complete what is effectively a three-part series that I've made this week on the sign of Aries and some of the deeper archetypal layers of this sign that we are going to be experiencing for quite some time now, as both Saturn and Neptune are set to be Neptune has already moved into Aries. Saturn is about to do so. They're both going to be there for a very long time. We've just had a solar eclipse in Aries, a couple of retrogrades here. So when this kind of conflagration of planetary energy happens in a fire sign like Aries, it is worth it to spend a little extra time meditating on the sign. Today, we're going to look at some of the deeper, heavier, darker themes that can come up in this sign. So if this isn't your cup of tea, or this feels like a series of heavy topics that you don't want to get into, take care of yourself. You don't have to listen to this. I say that because there are some days when I feel like going deep into a subject and maybe wading into more difficult subjects in astrology. And there are days when I have to protect my own serenity. So I say that to respect where you all may be coming from. At the same time, I want to promise you that although we're going to talk about some darker and heavier themes that are related with this sign and why, we are also going to talk about how we can meet them and what light parts of this sign we can tap into as a way of dealing with or handling some of these darker themes. So there will be, I hope, a very redemptive feeling by the end of today's talk in what is sometimes the heavier, darker side of the sign. So anyway, all that being said, before we get into it, remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. It really does help us grow. Welcome to so many new subscribers. Transcripts of my daily talks can be found on the website nightlightastrology.com. And when you are over there, be sure to check out the upcoming Year 1 program. It begins in late June 22nd. It's our first year course in ancient Hellenistic astrology. You go to the courses tab on the website. You will find the first year course there. You can scroll down to learn more about it. 30 classes on the year, all held via live webinar. They're all recorded, so you can follow along at your own pace if you can't attend live. We have breakout study sessions led by tutors, a forum discussion staffed with tutors. It's all available year round. Lots of bonus material. There's, of course, an optional certification track you can take if you want to become a professional astrologer. We offer certification through 3 years worth of curriculum at Nightlight, plus an extra year in Horary. But a lot of people take the course just for their own personal enrichment and spiritual development. At the bottom, you'll find early bird payment options that are available until May 15th. That saves you on the cost of the course if you register early. There's also need-based tuition assistance, which is a sliding scale version of tuition that you can choose and pick a price within to match your budget. This is especially useful for people who might be on a fixed or limited income. We want to make sure that people are not priced out of studying a sacred subject. It's a big part of our mission at Nightlight. So take advantage of that if you want. I hope to see some of you in class soon. Next week, there will be an informational video tagged on to every daily piece of content with more information about the course. So that will be coming up soon. Either, let's say I'm recording this like a little bit off my normal schedule because of vacation. So it'll either be next week or the week after. But anyway, you'll see that pretty soon. So if you have any questions, as anything you check out on the website with regard to the course, you can always email us, info@nightlightastrology.com. All right. Well, we're going to start with the real-time clock and remind ourselves of why we are spending so much time this week on the sign of Aries. I've said, if you've been following along with this week's videos, then you know that this has been our focus for the week. And the reason for that is that Neptune, a major outer planet, slow-moving planet, has just entered the sign of Aries on the heels of a solar eclipse in Aries, on the heels of both Mercury and Venus turning retrograde in the sign of Aries. Saturn will follow, entering Aries by the end of May. And then we have a couple of years of Saturn in Aries and 14 years plus of Neptune in Aries. So when this kind of thing happens on my channel, I like to dive as deeply as I can into the sign. This is something I do for myself to help me prepare and meditate on the archetypal nature of this temple of the zodiac. And by doing so, I really start to open my heart and prepare myself for a new season of life that is resembling or reflected by this sign of Aries. So that's why we do this. Today, we're going to get into some of arguably the darkest, heaviest topics that can come up in the sign of Aries. But what I want to do is make this an enlightening and encouraging exploration of these dark themes so we understand the why behind them. Not that we get filled with dread and anxiety, but that we understand why these themes, these heavier, darker themes, are a part of the exploration of this sign. Saturn and Neptune, especially in their conjunction, will probably bring up a number of these themes. We'll see them in the collective. More likely, a lot of these themes are things that we will start noticing as signs of the times, right? But there are ways in which we can extrapolate from some of these dark themes into the personal and psychological sphere, which we will attempt to do today. And then as we go, we will also talk about how to meet these themes. So after we go through the heavy themes and the why and the kind of how they boil down to personal experiences and collective experiences, then we'll ask the question, how do we meet these themes and what can we tap into in this sign that helps us to cope and to do something constructive with these energies, right? So that will be a part of everything today. So just know that if you need your thunder blanket, like our dog needed a little blanket when there was storms because she'd get so scared of the thunder. These are thunderous themes. These are the themes that make us sort of quake in our boots a little bit. That is that's not untrue. So I'll try to handle this as delicately as I can. Now, I don't shy away from looking at the heavy themes, as you guys know, because I think that life is filled with there is a play of light and dark, and it helps to have a deeper, meaningful understanding of darker and heavier themes. So anyway, Neptune in Aries, right there, you can see it's just entered. Let's now talk about these themes. So I've mentioned murder, I've mentioned martyrs, I've mentioned terror or terrorism, which is the experience of terror, and the theme of assassination. So let's ask these questions. Why are these themes associated with the sign of Aries? The simple answer is that this is one of the two domiciles of Mars, Scorpio being the other, and Mars is the god of war, of hostility, and of violence. And so notice that in all of these themes, we have Mars. In the act of murder, we have Mars. In the act of dying for something that you believe in, such as that's the definition of a martyr, right? You have Mars, the willingness to die for something heroically or courageously. In the act of terror or the experience of terror, you have Mars, who was associated with fear. And in assassination, as in the killing of someone, usually for a political, ideological, or religiously motivated reason, you also have a strong connection throughout the history of astrology to Mars. So let's kind of break this down one by one. I think it helps to get into the etymologies of words when we are exploring them. So first of all, let's look at the word murder. The word murder, the basic definition is like the unlawful killing of another human being by a person of sound mind. I guess that could be debated, and with premeditated malice. So intentional killing of someone for a reason and a premeditated plan to harm someone or kill someone. Now, there is a long history etymologically of this plotting and planning to kill someone as happening in the secret, as being something that is often committed not in the open, not that there's any like right way to kill someone, but not in the open, but secretively with the desire to get away with it and not be discovered. And we all, everybody knows that, right? So like most of our murder mysteries are like someone killed someone, but they're not coming out to claim that they did it, right? Right. So the detective has to solve Sherlock Holmes or, Agatha Christie's, detectives in her novels or whatever. They're always trying to figure out who did it because the murderer is hiding. This becomes really interesting with respect to another key feature of the transits we're dealing with, because Neptune is god of secret, subtle, invisible, intoxicating, and deceptive qualities. When you pair that in the sign of Mars, you get violent things that can be done behind the scenes or invisibly or secretively, which is also why there's a connection with something like Neptune and Saturn, who is also called a god of deception by ancient astrologers, and secretive forms of attack. And I'll show you some chart examples in a minute. But when you put two planets, Neptune and Saturn, both that have a connection with invisible, subtle, secretive, or deceptive qualities into a sign that is also connected to things like violence and aggression and attacks, you will sometimes get those things like murder or assassination, much of which involve secret plots, plans to act aggressively toward another person. It seems it's counterintuitive to us, I'm sure, when we think about the sign of Aries, to think of anything being done secretively, because Aries is such a sign where it's like what you see is what you get. It's like I'm here, I'm this, I'm acting, I'm doing, I'm not hiding anything. But that direct, bold, aggressive quality can become more secretive or deceptive in its expression because of the planets that are in the temple. So when you place Saturn, a god that was associated with secret, quiet, invisible things. And why is this? Saturn was the dimmest and most distant planet. And so it was associated with people that led lives of solitude and that were considered secretive. Many mystical traditions that are associated with Saturn are associated with Saturn in part because the mystical traditions are secretive. They hide the teachings are hidden, and the esoteric truths are set away or apart. There's many ways in which you can look at Saturn in the relationship to things like illusion or deception or hiddenness or secretiveness, but ancient astrologers clearly did. And so when you have Neptune and Saturn in this sign, and then you combine it with the one of the primary qualities of the sign, which is Mars, you get sort of bold, strongly convicted acts of violence or hostility, but often then with the deceptive nature of Neptune or Saturn, they're carried out secretively, which is why we have a connection to things like murder and assassination with Saturn and Neptune being in this sign. Now, the same is true for other placements. Like I'm going to show you some chart examples where you can actually see Neptune in Scorpio acting similarly, and other planets in Scorpio acting, secretively. Saturn in Scorpio, same thing. For sure, as a water sign, Scorpio has a natural inclination to secretiveness or hiddenness far more than Aries does. But when these planets are in Aries, you get that combination. So violence that has a secretive quality. And I'm not going to go into this because it's pretty heavy. But if you look back at the 1996 to 98 period, a number of very high profile murderous acts that were done secretively were also a part of that era. That's not going to be part of my coverage today, but like you can go look for yourself. So we have this basic combination of Mars as an act of violence, and then Neptune and Saturn as planets that can express things secretively, deceptively, invisibly. So that's where we get some of those qualities from. Now, I'm going to make some other connections here and just kind of dance around a little bit. Over the past couple of days, we have talked at length about individuality in the sign of Aries, spiritual individuation, psychological individuation. Maybe one of the most exciting parts of transits through Aries is the opportunity to, grow through healthy risk taking, through the development of courage and confidence. But we also talked about how that individuation almost always involves opposition and power struggle. Because individuality in this sign of Aries is almost always partly defined by who or what we oppose, if you carry that to a violent extreme, then a part of how a person may try to individuate, and I'm not saying this is healthy or good, this is a dark side of Aries, will be that I will individuate through acts of violence, that I will try to feel my own strength or develop my own power by, going to the extreme of feeling like I'm omnipotent and I can take the life of another soul that is a part of the body of God, that quite clearly ancient traditions, spiritual traditions, thought was a high spiritual crime, right? To kill another soul. So anyway, most ancient spiritual traditions embraced an attitude of nonviolence. I'm reminded of, I've been watching White Lotus season 3 with my wife. We love that show. I don't know, we're just guilty pleasure, I guess. But there's a character in the show who's a security guard, and he said, as he's like into this girl, and the girl kind of wants him to be more macho and strong, and he tells her, I really can't be that because the Buddha doesn't want us to harm people. So he kind of speaks his truth, and she's like, violence is natural. You should just be stronger. This very interesting dynamic that's a part of the series. If you're watching it, you know what I'm talking about. But I think a lot about that in this sign. And I'm going to talk more about this in a minute, because there is clearly a myth that many people get seduced by, an archetypal shadow that's a part of the myth of Aries, is what I should say, that many people get seduced by, which is that might makes right. Domination, victory, winning, asserting something over someone else is what makes me strong or righteous or good or powerful. And we get, it reminds me of all the Siths in Star Wars. They get seduced by the dark side of the Force, and then they get seduced by wielding power. Well, one of the ways that often plays out at an extreme level in a sign ruled by Mars is, I am going to take the life of another person, or I'm going to deliberately inflict fear upon other people through dominating acts of terror. Now, that can obviously have an expression that is about literal terrorism. Like, would I be surprised while Neptune's in Aries to see, us dealing collectively with the force of terrorism and whatever, guise it appears? No, not at all. And I don't mean to be predicting something terrible. It's just archetypally it fits. So will I be surprised to see us dealing with this? No. I mean, when Neptune was in Aries last, the KKK started, it's like there's a domestic terrorist group. I'm only reporting the weather as I see it. Could I see us dealing with this? Yes. Why? Because people become, with Neptune in Aries especially, which taps us into things and forces that are bigger than ourselves, like God, the universe, mysticism, oneness, divinity. When that's being expressed through the shadow side of Aries, a Mars-ruled sign, people can think to themselves, my version of God, my version of truth is bigger, better, stronger, and needs to be, asserted against whatever I feel opposes me, to the point where maybe I'll make them afraid and get them to submit. Remember Mars, like the jujitsu I was talking about, like, I'm going to submit you. And then I feel strong. The ego gets inflated, right? Well, I'm going to submit you by making you afraid, by doing something that terrorizes or terrifies, which is why one collective expression of this transit over many years to come could be dealing with that energy, that face of terror, or terrorizing people or influences or groups or whatever. So, I have to come to grips with that as an astrologer, but I also have to understand where it comes from. Individuality is partly defined by who and what we resist or oppose. It's true for a teenager. It's true in every walk of life. You end up having to individuate away from your teachers, away from your parents, and there's an oppositional tension that's a part of that. When that is taken to an extreme, well, now I feel the right to kill someone if they don't agree with me or if they are what I oppose. I can murder someone I don't like. I can terrorize people, right? Now, one expression of this energy, of course, is the expression of martyrdom. If you are, if you're a part of a group that is terrorizing other people, someone who is willing to terrorize other people and die while doing it, within that community will be thought of as a martyr. Now, you or I wouldn't think of anyone terrorizing anyone else as a martyr, right? But clearly, you think about the great acts of terror like 9/11, people within the communities that perpetrated those acts certainly saw their fellows as martyrs, right? They died for a righteous cause. So the energy of martyrdom comes up in this sign, but it can be very relative in terms of how we define what is or isn't an act of heroic martyrdom. Do you see what I'm saying? I want to say that the most positive expression of something like Neptune in Aries is that image of, I think it was a Vietnamese monk who set himself on fire in an act of political protest, like literally dying for a cause. Now that's extreme. Like, I'm not saying go lighting yourself on fire. I don't know if that's heroic or not. Some things are just beyond my comprehension. So, but the point is, as we were talking about Christ energy, dying for something you believe in. Remember, in the late 1960s, when Saturn was in Aries, there were a lot of experiences of young men sacrificing themselves for the cause of war in Vietnam, or coming back to realize that they were trying to be a martyr for something that they didn't really believe in or didn't really stand for. And so the extreme lengths to which we will go on the path of individuation to stand up for something and maybe die or enter into some tremendous level of sacrifice for is a part of the sign of Aries. The root of the word martyr shares roots with the word Mars. And the word martyr, connected with the word Mars in the ancient Greek vernacular, has the sense of bearing witness to something. True, I stand for something in a courtroom. Oh, here comes my AI thing. Let's do this. I have to testify. Okay, I'm playing. So if you think about in a courtroom setting, if you are asked to testify and you are asked to tell the truth about something, think about all the movies we have where there's a witness who doesn't want to take to the stand for fear of their own life. Speaking the truth to power is a very Aries theme. Oh, there, I did it again. Every time I raise my hand, my little AI tracking thing goes on. And I'm like sitting here testifying. That's so funny. All right. So speaking the truth to power is a very Aries, Mars, sort of exalted sun-like theme. When you stand up and testify truly in a court of law where judgment is being made or a process of deliberation is occurring and you stand for something, this is metaphorical. In life, the cosmic courtroom is the ongoing process of karma that is unfolding all around us. And there come times in life where we feel like we have to stand up and say something and be a true witness to what we feel is happening or what we think ought to happen, or to say what we saw or say how we feel, and to let our testimony become a part of the process, the cosmic process of unfolding that is unfolding around us. So Mars is related to taking a stand and accepting the consequences. And this is why the extreme of transits, like especially Neptune, which has a long history of being associated with martyrdom and sinners and saints and salvation and all of these epic religious themes with Neptune, right? Put it in a Mars ruled sign, and now we get, I will bear true witness to something I believe in, even if the people in the courtroom throw stones at me, or even if I'm in danger once I walk out of the courtroom of the opposition coming after me because they don't like that I told the truth about what they did. It's that kind of energy where I have to tell the truth. I have to stand for something, in something. Now, just remember, that can go in a lot of different ways. The people who, commit acts of terror, we know, we've seen this, evidence of this is replete. They believe very deeply that they're taking a stand too. I'm not saying that it's all relative. I certainly don't believe that. But the point is that the theme archetypally has a dark side where people will die for things that they believe, or they will kill people who believe things that they don't believe, which is where the martyr and the assassin share some kind of interesting root. The etymology of the word assassin is fascinating. I'm just literally going to read this to you. Via medieval French and Italian assassini from Arabic hashishin, an Arabic nickname variously explained for the Nizar Ismaili sect in the Middle East during the Crusades. Plural of hashishi from the source hashish. Now, I'm just reading you what this says. I don't know anything about this historically, but they were according to Etymology Online, they were a fanatical Muslim sect in the mountains of Lebanon at the time of the Crusades, under the leadership of the Old Man of the Mountains. Does that sound like Saturn and Aries a little bit? In Western European minds, they had a reputation for murdering opposing leaders after intoxicating themselves by eating hashish, but there's no evidence that the medieval Ismailis used hashish. Okay, regardless, it's an interesting story. Again, I'm not a historian, so I don't know how true all of that is, or what, some history is often complex in ways that can be misrepresented in simple passages like that. I don't know. But the point is the very interesting point, if you look back at the history of, whether it's like some of the so-called kamikaze pilots, I remember learning about this in high school, and or any other people who are going into battle, warriors or terrorists, there is a history of having to drug yourself to go into and commit the acts of violence because because it's overwhelming, because it's scary, like to have to go to run into battle. You'll see it, Band of Brothers, swig of whiskey before we go off to kill, drugging oneself before perpetrating an act of violence. There's a long, long history of that. The reason that I think that it's fascinating is that it is as though, I mean, one way I read that, especially with Neptune being so clearly connected to intoxicants and the word assassin having a relationship with the word hashish and I guess a process of drugging oneself before going to kill someone that was politically oppositional, is that there's a way in which we have to dissociate from our humanity in order to go to the kinds of extremes that this dark side of Aries represents. And I think that the potential to do that with Neptune in Aries is heightened, that people can dissociate and become so intoxicated by what they feel is right, what they oppose, what they stand for, that they will drug themselves or intoxicate themselves, literally or figuratively, in order to go to an extreme for the power or the message or the act of violence or whatever the case might be. So again, is any of this pleasant? No, definitely not, but it is something to be aware of on a very basic level. It's easy when Neptune and Saturn, both of which, by the way, were associated with medications that numb. Prior to Neptune being associated with anesthesia in the ancient world, Saturn was associated with numbing agents like ice. But the point is that when there is the potential to let the desire for power or the desire for strength, the desire to be right, or the desire to dominate, and the ego's investment in those actions, when we get so wrapped up in them, we can dissociate from ourselves. And we might even have to, in order to leave some basic element of humanity that simply cannot tolerate the extreme. So we have to become drunk on righteousness. We have to become drunk on ideology. We have to become maybe literally drunk to go and do something extreme. But the potential for each of us to become intoxicated by this fiery power of Mars is something to be aware of, because it has a long history in our species and our race of human beings, of being something that we do to set our humanity aside in order to commit terrible acts. Now, if you are having to defend or stand for something good, and some fights are necessary, I can imagine that the terror and the fear being so overwhelming, like I think of my own grandfather who fought in Korea and developed a drinking problem as a way of coping. I don't blame him, like he drank because he had to do these terrible things, and he thought that they were good, heroic things as a young boy, and so it's like I have kind of compassion, I'm sure we all do, for some level at which engaging in any kind of meaningful struggle, there's a way in which to cope with it on the level of our nervous system. We sort of have to numb ourselves. But this is something to watch for. I think the more we can stand in our feelings and our compassion and our care and our sensitivity for the care of other beings, the harder it is to let the dissociative numbing qualities of these placements carry us into extreme acts of aggression toward other people. So anyway, these are, again, I know it's like pretty heavy stuff. Number 5, Mars is a planet that was related to fear, but also sacred fear. The Buddha talks about the meaningful encounter with fear. Jesus faces his fear in the ninth hour in the Garden of Gethsemane. I don't know one person that has worked in the ayahuasca tradition that I worked in for over a decade that doesn't have a healthy appreciation for fear. Fear and trembling are something that many philosophers have written about. Like think of Soren Kierkegaard, um, Sartre, even an existentialist writes about meaningful encounters with fear. They may even embrace like a divinity or something, but I can't think of any spiritual and philosophical traditions that don't have a meaningful place for the reality of fear, facing fear, dealing with fear. Jedis in training have to go into the cave of their fears, face their shadow. Joseph Campbell talks at length about the hero's journey being one that is about facing shadows and fear. So why in the world would a sign ruled by Mars, the hero, the exaltation of the sun, another image of heroism, the two together in a fire sign, right? Why wouldn't they involve a meaningful encounter with what we fear? Now, the word terror comes from the word terrible, and its etymological roots mean to make afraid. From Sanskrit, which is to be, to tremble and be afraid, and from also a sacredness and fear combined, to tremble and shiver, a dread, but also there's this connotation of sacredness. Now, Mars was associated with both the garden variety levels of fear that have to do with, I'm going to make you afraid, I'm going to intimidate you, I'm going to bully you, the weaponizing of fear as a mechanism of power. That will be a part of this experience. Saturn and Neptune have a lot to do with facing bullies, facing oppressive forces that try to weaponize fear against you. But you and me are also susceptible to doing that to other people. And so we have to be on guard against that. Now, in a minute, I'm going to talk about how we meet these themes, and I hope I'll have some constructive things to say about it. But that Mars is associated along the path of spiritual individuation with the process of facing fear and shadow cannot be forgotten in this sign. It's too easy to look at this sign and just go, oh, psychologically think about the qualities of an Aries personality, which is fine. Like that's a meaningful use of astrology. But when we're talking about two long, slow moving outer planets moving through the sign, we are talking about alchemical spiritual processes that are not as simple as personality categories or behaviors. So the process of facing fear, of having to look at what makes us tremble and hopefully to transmute the fear from something that is merely material or emotional into something psycho-spiritual that has a value, that can play a role in our lives. Even if the fear is coming from someone who's bullying us, how we meet that fear, how we receive it, how we process it, makes it our experience of fear, makes it my courage, right? And that's really important because there will be forces collectively that try to terrorize. Again, I point to the simple fact that when Neptune was last in Aries, during that period of time, we had the Civil War. What a scary time where the collective forces and splits and oppositions were so loud. And at the same time, a terrorist group like the KKK was formed with severely prejudiced, racist, violent, terrorizing perspectives. What fear would you have lived in as a person of color during that time? And not that things are perfect now, but like, holy cow. Now, I believe that history, astrologers will say history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. You've probably heard that before. I don't remember who first said that, but it's a great quote. There will be some rhyming with themes of major opposition, and the fear, hand up to stop the AI. Oh my God, so weird. It's like this weird, meta level of symbolism that's been playing with me today. So, how do we face that fear? How do we deal with it? I'll just end it there. Now I want to just transition. How do we meet these themes? Because we will see these themes as a part of the next couple of years with Saturn in Aries and 14 with Neptune in Aries. Just as surely as we saw many resonant Neptune and Pisces themes or Pluto and Capricorn themes. We can't run from these things, but if we don't talk about how to meet them from the level of the heart, from the level of the higher self, then what are we doing? We're just spreading fear, spreading terror, astrology as terrorism. We don't need that. Well, courage and peace. Courage and peace are like, it's fun. It's kind of funny to put them together. Courage and peace is like nothing better than standing in a place of trust and peace. You have to be strong in a weird way to stand in a place of peace. I think, for example, of the long history of passive resistance, courage and peace as acts of bravery, forgiveness as a radical stand. There's maybe nothing more radical when we face these kinds of energies than forgiving. Is there anything stronger and bolder and more courageous than forgiveness, active forgiveness, living forgiveness? 3 is praying for the opposition. Whoever or whatever we oppose or opposes us, can we wholeheartedly pray for their well-being, even if we have to be a part of an oppositional struggle? Number 4, think about muscular strength with the sign, the planet Mars. I like to think about the spiritual heart, not the literal heart, although that's connected, as the strongest muscle that we can develop. And that is a muscle of love, peace, patience, compassion, kindness, charity, tolerance. Can we think of that muscle as the strongest thing to be developed? And can we face fear not by trying to eliminate it, but by facing it and letting it flow through us, by not giving into it, but also not resisting it? It is kind of like a Jedi training. Now, people have been asking me a lot about the theme of assassination in the past year. Obviously, there was an attempt on Donald Trump's life in July. And people, not surprisingly, who have done a little bit of research may understand that the sign of Aries has some significant historical connections to like political assassination. So I want to address that here at the end, just to kind of show you what that's all about and give you my thoughts on it. I'm just going to show you some charts and why these themes are coming up at all, because there's historical precedent for astrologers to talk about them. I'm going to show you some charts, and I'll just mention some things very briefly. This is the assassination chart of JFK. I'm just going to point out some very basic facts. Jupiter was in the sign of Aries at that time, at the 9th degree, which is where our eclipse just occurred. Not saying that means anything. I think it's interesting that there was a correlation with the release of the JFK documents recently, but you'll see here that Neptune at that time was in a Mars-ruled sign. So same thing, same kind of archetype. It's not identical, Scorpio and Aries, but there is a clear similarity there. I'm going to show you Martin Luther King Jr.'s, the chart of the day of his assassination. This is a chart that also features Neptune in a Mars-ruled sign of Scorpio, while Saturn was in the sign of Aries, and the sun was conjoining Saturn in the sign of Aries, and a king died, right? A political and spiritual leader died. So you see the theme of Neptune in a Mars-ruled sign and Saturn in Aries. Now I'll show you Robert Kennedy's assassination chart's another famous one from around the same time. So here's Robert Kennedy's assassination chart. Saturn again in Aries and Neptune also in a Mars-ruled sign of Scorpio. I'm just showing you the similarities archetypally. Abraham Lincoln's assassination chart. And I'm going to qualify why I'm showing you all of this a little bit more in a minute, but Neptune was in Aries at that time. Mars, notice that Mars was in Cancer too. I'm not, it's an interesting signature, the Mars square Neptune. But anyway, the point being, there again, you can see the presence of Neptune in Aries, a Mars ruled sign. Now, there is another one here. Let's go back to the Malcolm X assassination chart. You can see here when Malcolm X was killed, we had Neptune in Scorpio, a Mars ruled sign. They share something in common, which is that Neptune is expressing itself through a Mars ruled sign. So as I was saying earlier, when you have the god of secret, subtle, invisible, deceptive qualities in a sign of Mars, you often get those kinds of acts. The assassinations are a part of that archetypal combination. Saturn reiterates that in many ways in Aries as well, or Scorpio. So let me show you another one, which is the Indira Gandhi assassination chart. She was a prime minister of India. Her dad was a prime minister too, if I remember correctly. But anyway, there's a huge lineup of planets in Scorpio Mars ruled sign, including Saturn in a Mars ruled sign. So again, just some of the same exact archetypal combinations. It's again, there's some differences between Aries and Scorpio, but they are both Mars ruled signs, and so the combinations are very similar. And let's see here. I'll just show you one more that I think is kind of interesting. So this is the Anwar Sadat assassination chart, and this was in 1981. And what I think is interesting about this chart is that you have Mars and Uranus squaring, and of course, the Uranus is in a Mars ruled sign. So there's different combinations. Sometimes the Uranus in a Mars ruled sign with combinations to Mars will also express as sudden acts of violence. This is the Trump assassination chart from July 13th, attempted assassination chart, I should say. So on that day, you'll see that Mars and Uranus are almost exactly conjoined. So again, the Mars-Uranus theme is another variation of the same thing. I note that, not surprisingly, we were in eclipse seasons in Aries. So anyway, now all I'm trying to do by showing you those charts is address literally 100 emails I've gotten since the assassination attempt on Donald Trump in July to talk about the astrology of assassinations. I believe that usually it's a Mars kind of implication. I mean, that to me, that is the most consistent thing that I see over and over. Neptune and Mars ruled signs are replete. You know, it's just like there's so many of them with Neptune and Mars ruled signs, or with strong Saturn and Mars ruled signs, or with combinations involving Mars, like Uranus and Mars too. So anyway, so is it possible that during this next couple of years or throughout the life of Neptune and Aries, we see, you know, major like a major assassination in the collective? Would I be surprised? No, not, of course not. Like, look at what we've talked about today. Not at all. At the same time, I don't go looking for those things, and I don't like have any attachment to them. I'm not like, oh, I'm predicting that this will happen. I have no idea if it will happen or not. But we can see how and why so many people are emailing me and asking, right? 100 of you at least have emailed me since July asking me to address this topic. I'm not going to address it on the level of making predictions. What I am going to say is this is why, and this is where you can see an act like this and like these other very heavy themes coming up in this kind of placement. But how do we meet them, right? Courage and peace. That's the light side of Mars, right? A sacred spiritual warrior sees forgiveness as a radical stand, prays for those we oppose, is careful not to become a bully ourselves, moderates and tempers the dissociative, numbing tendencies of the desire to win or be victorious or powerful over others. We think of strength of heart as the strongest muscle to be developed. We face fear and we let it flow through us. So I hope that this has been a good, healthy exploration, and that even if we visited some heavy topics, you are left with the feeling that this is going to be a meaningful experience with these transits through Aries, and one that we can meet with all of the best qualities that are within us. So, on that note, I will end it for the day. Hope you have a great weekend to come, and we will see you again on Monday. Bye, everyone.